right, I see some folks starting to come in. We'll go ahead and just wait a minute or so until we have a full house, and then we'll get to it. All right, it looks like it's kind of slowed down, so I will go ahead and start the introductions. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to today's presentation on using Wave to test and improve web page accessibility with Jared Smith of WebAim. Jared Smith is the Associate Director of WebAim. He is a highly demanded presenter and has provided web accessibility training to tens of thousands of web professionals throughout the world. With over 20 years of experience working in the field of web design, development, and accessibility, he brings a wealth of knowledge and experience that is used to help others create and maintain highly accessible web content. So before we turn things over to Jared, just a couple housekeeping notes. Please keep your microphones off, cameras are optional, and questions will be taken throughout the webinar, but in the chat. They'll be answered as they come in, and if we miss any of them, they'll be answered at the end of the presentation. Captioning is available. The link has been added into the chat. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted on our NWHeat.org website, so look forward to that. And today's webinar is part 1 of 2. So after this one, please bring your web accessibility questions to part 2 on January 18th, 2023. I'm adding that registration into the chat now, that registration link. So you can go ahead and get that on your calendars. And lastly, there will be a brief survey sent out after the webinar. So if you have the time, please fill it out. We'll remind you of this at the end. And with that, I'll let Jared take it away.
Okay, thank you, Kelly, for the introduction. I appreciate the invitation to be here today. I'm Jared Smith. I'm the Associate Director of WebAim, which is the Web Accessibility in Mind project. We're a nonprofit consultancy based at the Institute for Disability Research, Policy, and Practice at Utah State University. And we do web accessibility. That's what we're passionate about. We provide services and technical assistance, training, website evaluation, research, tool development, including Wave, and a lot of other things to help educate and empower organizations and individuals to improve their accessibility for people with disabilities. So today I'll be talking about Wave, which is our web accessibility evaluation tool. I'll provide today's going to be more of an overview of the tool and how to use it and some of the features and maybe some things if you're already a Wave user that maybe you're not familiar with. As Kelly mentioned, we'll have a follow-up webinar where we'll really spend some more time just answering your questions, maybe getting into more in-depth testing, perhaps on your own content, and it'll be a little more flexible for our next session. This one will be a little bit more presentational. Again, if you do have questions, please post those into the chat and I'll try to answer them as we go, or we'll queue them up and answer at the end. So a little bit about what is Wave. So Wave is a web accessibility testing tool. It's been in development now for well over 20 years. So it's been continually updated and evolved over the history of 20 years, which is about as long as we've had web accessibility. So it's been around for a long time and we're continually updating and refining it. And you're going to get a bit of a sneak peek into some new Wave functionality that isn't even available yet. You're going to be the first ones outside of WebAim to really get a peek at this today. We believe it is the most commonly used accessibility testing tool. At WebAim, we conduct a survey every few years of web accessibility practitioners, folks that are implementing accessibility, and they report that Wave is among the tools that are available the most commonly used. We don't have exact numbers on usage. We know our online version of Wave is used to test many millions of pages every year. We have over 300,000 regular Wave browser extension users. And so those are, those extensions. We don't know how many pages are tested using those extensions, but definitely millions and millions of pages. So a little bit more about Wave and kind of our philosophy when it comes to Wave and our approach in building this tool. We want it to be easy to use. We want it to be powerful for those that are just very new to accessibility, as well as those that are maybe even accessibility professionals or testers that are really well versed in accessibility. So we try to cover that gamut of expertise, and that can be a little bit tricky, but we really strive for it to be easy to use and also to be educational, to teach about accessibility along the way. We want to inform about accessibility, not just identify issues, but to educate as to what those issues are and how they impact users, and maybe most important, how to actually address those accessibility issues that may be identified. Because we know the limitations of automated testing tools, that no automated tool, including Wave, can tell you if a web page is compliant with accessibility guidelines or if it's accessible, because that automated testing is based only on automated heuristics and tests and patterns. And the human experience is much more diverse and broad than that. So we have developed Wave to help facilitate human evaluation. We understand the criticality of human testing to determine true accessibility and compliance. So Wave does a lot of automated testing, but then it also helps to facilitate that necessary and critical human aspect of accessibility testing to get a better sense of actual end user accessibility impacts. It is designed to align with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and we always align with the most current version. Currently 2.1, 2.2 will be out probably within a few months. There are some tests that we do in Wave that extend beyond the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There are some things that we know impact end users with disabilities that are not covered by the guidelines that we also test for or identify to facilitate human testing of those things. Our goal is to have no false positives, so that in other words, we should never flag an error that is not actually an end user issue or a potential end user issue. With that said, if we err, we try to err on the side of users with disabilities over developers. As an example, Wave may identify an accessibility error in content in a web page that is visibly hidden or hidden in a way that it would not be presented to users with disabilities. Very often, that hidden content is in the page because at some point it may be presented to the end user. And if those accessibility errors are present, they would then be end user issues. They'd be presented to an end user with a disability. So sometimes we get questions like, why is Wave flagging an error in content that's not presented to users? Is that a false positive? And you might argue that it is, but we don't know what that content is there for. It's in the page. It may be presented to the user. So we choose to err on the side of the users, right, over a developer. A developer can always analyze that and determine, oh yeah, this content is never actually presented to users. Therefore, I will ignore that error in Wave. But we'd prefer to ensure that people are aware of potential issues rather than have them maybe be not tested or not flagged within Wave. We also, excuse me, understand that more is not always better. Some testing tools will give you pages and pages of really dense reports and identify every little nuanced potential accessibility issue based on maybe a very broad or creative interpretation of the accessibility guidelines. And that's not always helpful for actually improving accessibility. It just sometimes can be quite overwhelming and confusing. So we want to really focus on that end user experience and focus on the things that are impacting users. In short, we want Wave users to be improving accessibility, not just making tool errors go away. So when I say Wave is really a suite of accessibility tools. There are several different types or versions of Wave. The primary ones are our visual type of testing tools. We have an online version at wave.webaim.org. You can go to the website, punch in a website address, hit a button, and it will evaluate any publicly accessible web page. That online version is doing that testing directly within your web browser. So it loads the page and then conducts that test in your browser. So that can do the testing after scripting has been applied and styles have been applied. It analyzes the rendered DOM. If you understand that term, it's document object model. It's essentially the living version of the web page inside your web browser. It's not just looking at the source code, it's looking at a source code after it has been generated into a dynamic web page. That gives a much more accurate representation of actual accessibility, because you're testing the page right within your browser as it is rendered within that browser. There are some scripting limitations with very complex pages, but just because of the nature of that content kind of being funneled through our web servers to your browser. We also have Chrome, Firefox, and Edge browser extensions. I would recommend the extensions if you're doing more than just a little bit of testing. The online version is great for really quick, high-level testing. But if you want to get into some more in-depth testing, I would recommend the browser extensions. Both of these are freely available, the online and the extensions, freely available to everyone. We put a lot of effort and work into these, and we provide them freely available to the community to help support accessibility in our mission at WebAim. The browser extensions, they're best for checking password protected or intranet pages or local pages, pages that are not publicly accessible to the online service. And the online version will test the page immediately after that page is loaded, whereas the browser extensions, they analyze the web page on demand at any moment in time and analyze that current DOM, that living version of the page in your browser. The real power of that is that you can actually manipulate that page content, maybe changing that, trigger a form error or trigger a dialogue or a pop-up or something like that in the page, and then activate Wave and test that current state of that page. So that's really powerful, much more powerful than maybe just testing the initial state of that page. Because of these differences, sometimes there are minor differences in the test results or output of Wave between these two versions. It's just based on the nature of kind of how that content's being generated within your browser. So I'm going to go through a few slides to kind of show the functionality and features of Wave, and then we'll go back and we'll demonstrate that here in just a few minutes. So this is an analysis of Senate.gov. The Senate's web page, homepage. This is using the Wave Chrome extension, so in the Chrome browser. So essentially what's happened is, I went to the Senate.gov page, I activated Wave, and what Wave does is it injects icons and indicators into the page to provide feedback about accessibility. It also generates this sidebar on the left-hand side of the screen that provides additional Wave functionality. Initially, the sidebar provides a summary of the accessibility findings of Wave. In this case, Wave detected 16 errors. Errors are going to be things that almost certainly have negative end user impact. Almost always are going to align with failures of the web content accessibility guidelines. They are indicated visually in the page by red icons. There are also contrast errors. That's a special type of error where there is insufficient contrast or brightness or luminance difference between the text and the background of that text. Those are also indicated by distinct red errors or icons within the page. So on this page, there were 86 contrast errors detected, or 86 instances of text that had contrast that did not meet the web content accessibility guidelines, or WCAG. If I say WCAG, that's what I'm referring to, guidelines. There are orange icons that indicate alerts. Alerts in Wave are things that are probably accessibility issues, or at least are potential accessibility issues, but the Wave could not determine if they're an accessibility issue or compliance failure in an automated way. Alerts are things that you need to take a look at. They're there to prompt human assessment to determine whether that thing that has been identified is an actual accessibility issue or not. Green icons indicate accessibility features. There are 14 of them on this page. Those indicate things that are probably beneficial for accessibility, things like alternative text for images. But even though it's identified as a feature, Wave can't always know for sure that it's going to be beneficial for accessibility, just that it probably is. An example with alternative text Wave may identify the alternative text, and an image with alternative text is a feature and show the green feature icon, but it can't always assess the quality of that alternative text. It can't tell you if the alternative text is actually equivalent to the content of an image that's being presented. So even features necessitate some human assessment, right, to determine whether it is actually accessible. One thing that can help facilitate that, at least in the case of alternative text, is that Wave will present the alternative text for an image within the page adjacent to the icon that's adjacent to the image that has been tested. So in this case, there's the US flag icon. There's an icon or a green icon that indicates the image has alternative text. And then adjacent to that is the text of US flag in this green box. That is Wave visually presenting the alternative text for that image. That allows quick assessment of that alternative text to determine whether it's equivalent for that image. In this case, it would be. That's good alternative text. There are blue icons, and blue icons indicate structural elements. Those are things like lists and tables and frames and regions and headings within the page. Those are things that very often will help support better accessibility. As always, they also necessitate some human testing just to make sure that those structural elements are being used correctly and properly to support accessibility. And then the sixth and final category is for ARIA. ARIA is a more advanced, it stands for Advanced or Accessible Rich Internet Applications. It's more advanced coding, primarily to enhance accessibility for screen reader users. And those purple icons are there. And again, Wave just can help support testing that code to make sure it's been done correctly. So that's the summary tab. You can then click on View Details or go to the Details tab or panel in the sidebar. And this is where you can get into more detail. Not only does it indicate the number of errors, but the actual types of errors. It'll list the icons, a number of individual errors that are present. And so you can actually get a little more detail to see what is going on. For any of the icons within the page itself, you can click on that icon. It'll pop up a little tooltip to give you a summary of information about that particular icon. So this icon here, for instance, indicates there's an empty form label. It's a form label that is present but does not contain any content. That's going to pose an accessibility issue for end users, and Wave has identified that as an error. So you can click around and there's some interaction between these. You can, for instance, click on an icon in the sidebar and it'll kind of focus and highlight and move to that icon's location, the associated icon's location within the web page itself. At the top of the sidebar is this styles toggle option. By default, the styles are on within the page. What that means is all visual styles are going to be rendered. You're going to see the page within Wave generally as it's going to be seen, just regularly within your browser. Because Wave is injecting icons into the page, and because Wave can maybe sometimes identify issues in content that are hidden with styles within the page, sometimes it's handy to turn off those styles. That'll kind of remove the visual formatting of the page and just linearize it and streamline that content. Makes it easier to see the Wave icons with the associated content. Again, you lose the visual design, but it just kind of streamlines things a little bit and can make it easier to test within Wave. Another added benefit of turning off styles is you can see visually the reading and navigation order of the page content. That's important for accessibility, to see the order in which a screen reader would read or a keyboard user would navigate through that page content. So that's another functionality, piece of functionality that can be handy. For any of the icons, you can, in the sidebar in the details panel, you can click the little information icon, or in the tooltip for any of the icons, you can click the reference link, and it'll take you to the reference panel. The reference panel is where you can really learn about what those particular icons mean. In this case, the empty form label icon, it indicates what it means, why it matters. How does this impact users with disabilities? How to fix it, right? What are the things you need to do to maybe address that accessibility issue or potential accessibility issue? It describes the algorithm in English, like what is it that Wave was looking for and tested that caused this particular thing to appear. And then there are links to any relevant standards and guidelines. You can select the icon index to kind of pull up the list of all of the possible errors, contrast errors, alerts, features, structural elements, and ARIA icons that are available within Wave. Next is the structure panel. The structure panel kind of pulls out just the high-level structure of a page, the regions and headings that are present within that web page. This can be really handy to see what that overall page structure is. Those structural elements like regions and headings can be used by keyboard and screen reader users to facilitate navigation, to say to jump from region to region or to navigate by headings, which is a very, very common way of exploring page content. So the structure panel allows you to see what that high level structure of the page is and analyze it to see what the heading structure is, what the heading order, to see if there are regions like header or navigation, main, footer, and so forth, if those have been defined. One thing you'll note here is kind of towards the bottom of that sidebar, there's an orange icon, and that orange icon indicates a skipped heading level. In this case, the heading structure went from an H1, a first level heading of floor proceedings, to a third level heading. So it skipped a second level heading, and that can be impactful for accessibility. It isn't always a failure of the guidelines, but Wave has identified that skipped heading level as an alert to say, hey, you should probably look at this and see if that skipped heading level is actually appropriate, and more than likely would prompt fixing that skipped heading level to better facilitate navigation and understanding of that page content. There's also a contrast panel, and contrast panel allows you to get additional exploration of page elements that have insufficient contrast. And I'll demonstrate this a little bit more in just a moment. At the bottom of the web page, there's a little button that says code. You can open that code panel, or in the tooltip for any of the icons, you can click on the code link, and it'll pull up this little panel at the bottom of the page that shows the underlying page code. Now, this is not the source code of the web page. It's actually the rendered DOM content of that page within your browser. And with that code panel open, if you click on any of the icons, it will scroll to and kind of highlight the relevant code within that code panel. This can be really handy just to see, you know, if you're familiar with the coding, allows you to see what's going on under the hood of the page in the DOM of that page that may have actually caused a particular Wave icon or error to be present. So that's for more kind of developer type of audience, but you can open up that code panel and really dig deep into what's actually happening under the hood of that web page. Okay, so with that, let me I'm going to do a little bit of a Wave demo here and give you a sneak peek of some new features of Wave that will be available very, very soon. We're hoping in the next day or two to have this new updated version of Wave available publicly on the website, as well as the browser in the browser extensions. So I can go to wave.webaim.org. As I mentioned before, I can put in a website address here and hit a button and test it. But I'm going to be using the browser extensions that are available just by clicking browser extensions, and then you can install those extensions for Chrome, Firefox, or Edge. I'm going to test this NASA page. I'm going to drop this in chat real quick, so you have this page. If you want to follow along and with Wave, you can either put it in here in the web page address, or if you have or install one of the extensions, you can follow along and kind of see this happen within your own browser if you would like to do that. So with this web page open, I'm in the Chrome browser. I have the Chrome extension installed. So I'm going to go over here on the right-hand side of the address bar. There's this little W Wave icon. Hopefully you can see that. I know it's probably really, really small on your screen, but I can click that Wave icon. I can also right-click anywhere and select Wave this page. And that will activate Wave and test this particular page as it is currently presented within my web browser. So if I were logging into, say, Canvas or a content management system or an intranet, or if I had a really dynamic application, I could interact with that page and then activate Wave and test it at that moment. So this has injected those icons into the page in the sidebar. That this indicates this page has 3 errors, 63 contrast errors, 13 alerts, and so forth. So I can go to view details or the details tab here, and this is going to show me all of those particular icons as categorized by Wave. I can click on an icon and it'll scroll to and kind of highlight that in the page. In this case, this search filled up here is missing a form label, and Wave has tested and identified that and is showing me visually in the page the relevant form input that is missing. Now, some of these icons in the sidebar are kind of dimmed or grayed out. When you see those indicate icons that are relevant to content in the page that is hidden, or the icon itself may be hidden visually, primarily due to styles. So Wave has tested something, but there may not be an associated icon visible in the page because it's in some visually hidden content. So what I can do in this case is I can turn off styles. And with styles disabled, I can click on one of these icons and actually see where it is within the page. Okay, again, any of these icons, I can click on it to pull up the tooltip. It says this is an empty link. It's a link that contains no text. Because it was an empty link, it was hidden. There was, I needed to disable styles in order to view that. I can click on the reference link here. That will take me to the reference panel for that particular error or icon. In the details panel, I can turn on or turn off categories or individual types of things. So for instance, if I don't want to test the contrast errors right now, I can just uncheck that checkbox. They immediately disappear within the page. So I can kind of filter this out and focus on the particular types of things that I want to test at that particular moment.
Hey, Jared,
yes,
Mary, the super quick question here. Someone noticed that yours shows 5 features and there it's showing 6 features.
Yeah. Okay, so the difference there could be due to a wide variety of things. It may be due to just differences in the browser that we're using. Maybe if you're on Firefox, their server may actually present different content to different browsers, or different browsers in different locations, or based on the time of day or things like that. So that may explain that. It may be due to the fact that I have an updated version of the extension. The page could be different based on whether I visited this page before. There's a lot of things that can impact maybe those slight varieties in that. So yeah, and then the next comment, I uploaded the page to wave.webaim.org, and your plugin receives 63 contrast errors, and the online Wave version only picked up 3 contrast errors. Interesting here. So if you're seeing fewer contrast errors, that's probably due to some updates in the contrast checking. So one of the reasons you'll notice here, if I go to turn on those contrast errors again, almost all of these are grayed out. The reason for that is those contrast errors are present within these drop-down menus, and Wave is testing those in my version, but it may not be in that online version. So that might be a reason why you're seeing some of those differences. If you test this tomorrow or the next day, as soon as we update the online version, you should see much more harmony between those after that update. Okay, so so we were talking about the reference panel. You can turn on or turn off these things. I can click on any icon to jump directly to it. For instance, here's an alert icon for long alternative text. And it shows me that alternative text adjacent to the icon, adjacent to the image itself. And, again, this is an alert. Wave saying this isn't necessarily a failure. It's just something that Wave has identified. Hey, there's some alternative text here that's pretty long. And usually long alternative text may indicate something that you want to look at and test for accessibility issues. In this case, this text is generally a bit extraneous. It pretty much repeats the adjacent text and it could maybe be trimmed up a little bit. Again, not a failure, but it's something that Wave has identified to prompt that human testing. Now here's the new Wave functionality. This is something that you don't have in your version of Wave. It'll be released within a couple days. It's this new order panel in the sidebar. If I select order, what Wave does is it initially hides all of those icons within the page and then adds all of these number elements within the page. So let me turn these back off again. So I can see these numbers. This indicates the navigation order of elements within the page. So I can just follow the numbers 1, 2, and then 3 is over here for the search field, and then 4, 5, 6 across the navigation. And then I come into the page and so forth. Also in the sidebar, it will list all of the navigable elements within the page, and it will indicate the order of those elements as it does within the page with those little number icons. It indicates the role or the type of element that is present. You know, here there's a link, there's a text input, there are buttons, things like that, sliders, things that are interactive. It tells you what type of thing it is, and then it indicates the accessible name. Now, accessible name is kind of deep speak a little bit. It's in the accessibility guidelines. That's what essentially what a screen reader is going to read for a particular element. So I can see the first element on this page that's navigable is a link, and the text is skip to main content. The next link is a NASA image. Now, a link that has text or an accessible name of NASA. The third element is a text input with text of search. Now, one thing of note, this is the search field up here at the top right. I would expect that this button would be the next navigable element, but Wave here does not list that actual button as a navigable element. So that I can type into the search field, but I can't actually navigate to the button to submit that search using the keyboard. I could hit enter to submit it, but that may not be clear to some users. So this is kind of new. I think, you know, it's a bit of a work in progress, but all of this navigation stuff within the page can kind of facilitate testing of the navigational elements. Now, and not only the order, but the type of thing that's being presented to the user and the accessible name, or what would be presented to assistive technologies for that element. I can also show or hide the Wave icons within the page. If I want to see the icons in association with those numbers, I can do that as well. So this is something we'd love to get feedback about as you test it out and, you know, see how it works. If I come to the structure panel for this page, and this shows the overall structure of the page. And in this case, you notice a few of these icons are grayed out, meaning they're hidden. So I'm going to turn off styles real quick. And this sidebar might be a little complex, but the order and structure of the boxes here is informative. So this is telling me that this page has a header. If I click on it, it highlights it within the page, and there's actually no content within the header region of this web page. There's a main region. As before, there's no actual content within the main region. There's a footer, same thing. It's empty, right? There's nothing within the footer of this page. Then there's our navigation, and it has all of our navigation links within it. And there's a search field or search area within the navigation, which is great. There's an aside or a sidebar. That's actually for these links that are on the side of the page. So that seems appropriate. But then I actually get to the main content area of the page. I have a first level heading at the beginning of the main content. But notice that this main content is not actually contained within the main region of this page. This is indicating there's kind of some weird structural things going on with this page. A screen reader user may be presented with the header, the main content, and the footer, but nothing within them. Then the navigation, search, and the sidebar, and then they kind of get to the main content in absence of any region. So restructuring this to have the main content actually within the main region would be much better for accessibility. Wave also here is showing a skipped heading level, right? So it jumps from this H1 to this H5 that contains these links, tags, links. And again, the orange alert icon says there's a skipped heading level. Not always a failure, but something that you probably should test. In this case, this content actually isn't a heading. It's not describing content that comes after that text. So this probably shouldn't be a heading at all. And Wave is, Wave has identified that. It's prompted the Wave user to go in and explore and examine that to see if there's actually an accessibility issue present. So this structure panel can be really handy. And then finally, we have our contrast panel. So I'm going to turn this back, turn styles back on. And in the contrast panel, I can click on any of these contrast icons, and Wave will indicate, kind of populate the tools here in the sidebar with details about that particular text. Now, Wave can only test text contrast. It doesn't analyze images or text within images or really complex things. It does a really good job of identifying text that does not have contrast that meets the Web Content Accessibility Guideline requirements. Clicking on this icon, it indicates a contrast ratio of 4.03 to 1. If you're not familiar with that, that's just a ratio that's defined in the guidelines as a measure of contrast, and it indicates that it is a failure for normal text at AA and at AAA. If this were large text, it would pass, but this is not large text. Wave actually does that size calculation. The guidelines have different thresholds for contrast if it's large text versus non-large text, and Wave does all of that calculation for you. So this text here with a 4.03 to 1 contrast ratio of this light blue on white is indicated as a failure. So this is really handy. I can go through all of these low contrast texts within the page to test them. There is this functionality in the sidebar where I can actually increase or decrease, kind of drag these sliders or put in a color value, and that will actually preview that within the page. So if I wanted this text to be a little bit darker so that it passes, I can just adjust that this lightness slider. Now this darker color of blue, as previewed within the page, has a contrast ratio of 5.92 to 1. I could then take that color value, maybe put it back into my page styles and apply that to the page, and I would know that that color combination would meet the WCAG contrast requirements. And that's nice because it actually previews that within the page, right? I could go with like a dark color on a or a light color on a dark background with lots and lots of contrast and pull out those color values. So there's a lot of neat functionality here. One thing that's a little more advanced that you could do, let's say you have, let me see if I can find one here. There's not a good example, but let's say that I had an image within this page, and this image contained text, and I wanted to test the contrast of that. Wave can't automatically test that. But one thing I could do is I could click on this this little color block here, and it pulls up this color swatch where I can input all different types of color values. But there is this little eyedropper icon. I can click on it. I can then go into the page and click somewhere within the page. Say I want to test the contrast of this white text on a background. So I'll go to our background color, click the eyedropper, come over and click the blue background here. And this shows that white on that color blue has a 9.63 to 1 contrast ratio. So it passes. So that's some additional kind of advanced functionality that can be handy for testing any color value within the page, even if it's in an image or a gradient or something like that. Okay. There's also this code panel here at the bottom. I mentioned that you can open it, or you can click on any icon within the page and select code, and it'll open it and jump to it. In this particular case, this input that's missing a label, I could analyze the underlying code to see what's going on. Of interest is there is this associated icon here for an orphan form label. That's a form label that's present but does not have is not correctly associated with the form control. So I actually have, there's a label here. If you're familiar with coding, if you're not, don't worry too much about it. This is basically saying, hey, there's an input, there's a label here that's not associated to an input, and our input itself is not labeled. So it just indicates a mismatch, a misalignment of the label to the input. And I could see that within the code and then go in and address that issue in the code and fix it. Okay. So that is a bit of an overview of Wave. Let me jump back and talk about some other things that are available. While Wave is really most powerful for that individual page testing, right? Really getting in depth into a single page and testing it. There has been demand over the years for using Wave to test lots and lots of pages, right? And just collecting data from Wave about accessibility across, say, an entire website or multiple websites. So we developed a Wave API, or an application programming interface. Essentially what it does is you send the API a URL to the Wave API server, which is usually cloud-based. It will download the page, test it, and then return test result data in either JSON or XML format. You can then parse that data, You can put it in a database or a spreadsheet or email Joe because he wrote that portion of the site, if that's what his responsibility is. There's all sorts of things you can do with that data. And that's the real power of the APIs. You're not constrained to a particular reporting structure. You can build this into your own processes, your own systems, and very quickly just send lots of URLs, get back the data, and then parse and use that data in ways that you would want. So this can be helpful for testing lots of pages and getting the data. Could be integrated, say, into a content management system. Maybe if somebody is trying to publish new content, before it's published, it's tested with the Wave API. And if there's an accessibility error, maybe it blocks the publication of that content until the user fixes it. It could be integrated into continuous integration or continuous delivery types of development processes. We also have a Wave testing engine, which is kind of similar, but the testing engine is basically just JavaScript. It's the brains of Wave that does that testing. And the testing engine can be injected into a browser. Usually that browser context is going to be not kind of a standard browser like you browse in, but kind of like a cloud-based or a headless browser. Headless browser is kind of a browser that can run without a visual interface on a computer somewhere, and then testing can be done on that particular page. So things like Selenium and Puppeteer, if you're familiar with those, they're very often done for doing a lot of testing on web pages without a user having to sit there and do that testing. It's an automated process. And the Wave testing engine does that. It's a JavaScript. It can be injected into the page within that browser and then returns a JavaScript object with all of those accessibility items, right? The errors, alerts, features, and then you can parse and do what you want with that resulting data. So the standalone API and testing engine, these are licensed. There's flexible annual licensing. The API has a built-in Chrome browser for really quick analysis. Again, the testing engine supports those headless browsers for more kind of development types of processes. There's the question, could the Wave API be integrated in an LMS? Yes. Yeah, that's one of the use cases for that, is that it can be implemented. Now, usually it takes some development on your end to kind of build the type of reporting that you might want from that, but yeah, absolutely, it could be. The API also supports preload and postload scripts. So essentially, what that does is you could actually load content and interact with a website before the page to be tested is loaded. That could be done. One thing that could be done there, for instance, is logging into a password protected web page. So you could script, go to the login page, put in this username, this password, hit this button, go to resulting page, then navigate to that internal password protected page to be tested, and then have Wave do its testing and return the result. You can also script page interactions, like maybe you want to test what happens after a user submits a form and triggers a form error. You can kind of record and then script that interaction and then have Wave test the resulting content after that error has been triggered. It can return XPath or CSS selector output. It's a little bit complex. Essentially, instead of saying, hey, there's an image that's missing an alternative text, XPath and CSS selectors, those are distinct ways of defining the actual distinct image on the page that's missing that alternative text. So it allows an association from a page element, say an image, to the actual Wave error. And that can be handy for reporting and identifying where those issues are present within the page using the API or the testing engine. You can also really customize these, for instance, to do like mobile emulation, testing responsive breakpoints. For instance, you can test the page in its desktop presentation, its tablet presentation, and its mobile presentation as 3 different tests and compare the results. We use the Wave API in our WebAim Million analysis. This is a research project that we do where we publish accessibility data on the top, the home pages for the top 1 million websites. So that's something that we do once a year. And if you want to kind of see, get a snapshot of how accessibility is generally on the web, the WebAim Million is a great resource for that. We also use, now the standalone API, the testing engine. We also have a subscription API in the WebAim site that you can go to and just kind of buy credits and do the testing via our servers. These are things where there are some costs associated with those, but that's what allows us to develop Wave generally and to provide those other tools freely for everyone. So I'm not here to sell you anything, but if you're looking at testing a lot of content and want to use Wave, these tools may be helpful for you. We also have a WebAim, which is an accessibility impact service. We see a lot of entities that just need kind of a snapshot of their accessibility. I want to know where they're at and what the accessibility issues are and maybe how their website compares to other pages generally. So the AIM service collects accessibility data using the Wave API across an entire website and generates an automated accessibility score. That score is aligned with the accessibility data for those 1 million homepages. So it allows you to see, based on automated testing sites generally on the web. So it gives you a comparison score. We also do high-level manual testing, which is always going to be important, right? We do some high-level testing and manual scoring. So our expert testers go in and indicate potential or actual accessibility issues and measures of impact of those issues. And then the entering result is a AIM score and a detailed report of those detected accessibility issues and our expert testing summary of that high level testing. So that's something else. If Wave is of interest and use to you, you want to kind of see what the Wave data is across an entire site. It's a very low cost. It's like $500 for up to 20,000 pages. Just gives you a great way to get all of that Wave data across your entire site. There's also Pope Tech. Pope Tech has integrated Wave into an enterprise level web accessibility testing and reporting system. So this takes the power of Wave, but does like dashboarding, crawling your entire website, tracking progress over time. So you can see charts of progress and errors and other accessibility data over time. You can schedule regular scans. You can export reports. You can scan pages behind the login via an automated process. The question was about, can the Wave API be integrated into an LMS? If you have the Canvas LMS, Pope Tech has an integration already with the Canvas LMS to allow testing of that LMS content using Wave and then collecting that data and providing, real easy access to it. So that's not something that we develop. We have a great collaboration with the folks at Pope Tech, but you can check out pope.tech if you want to learn some more about that kind of integration and power of Wave in that enterprise type of tool. All right. Finally, just want to highlight a few other useful resources for you. We have an introduction to Wave video. This is available on the Wave website. So if I go to the Wave homepage, at the bottom, there's this introduction to Wave. It's mostly just what I've covered, but if you want to share that, that's a great way for folks to get an introduction to Wave generally. We also have help documentation available. So if you have questions, you can check out our online help documentation. I also want to highlight these two other resources that are available. One is this quick reference for testing web content. I'll drop the link there in chat. This is something available on the WebAim site, just a high level kind of testing resource. It's designed really to be printed. It's one page, right? It's a quick reference, but it covers testing with Wave, using a checklist to look for other aspects of accessibility and conformance with the accessibility guidelines, keyboard accessibility, and so forth. We also have a more detailed web accessibility evaluation guide. I'll drop this one in chat as well. And this one goes into more depth. Essentially, if you want some guidance in using Wave and the types of things that you might test with Wave and a bit of a structure and process to that, this evaluation guide can really help you with that. So it provides a bit of an overview of Wave and some other tools, and then goes through techniques, indicating, for instance, if I want to test images and alternative text, it's going to show the relevant icons and what those things actually mean within the page. And this is much more involved and very relevant to Wave, but it takes those icons and can provide some structure for testing. And then it does guides testing for other things like resizing content as may be done by users with low vision, checking contrast, keyboard accessibility, and so forth. So that's another resource that might be helpful to you. And as I mentioned before, this is just part one. We're gonna have part two, which will really be more Q&A focused. I may do a little more demonstration, but I'd like to kind of field your questions and maybe give you guys an opportunity between now and then to go in and start using Wave, explore it on your own websites, and then come back maybe with questions or examples of things that we can explore together in that next webinar, which will be on January 18th. So with that, I will say thank you and see if there are any questions. If there are any, please take the time now to go ahead and pose those. And I think you can probably unmute. I think that's probably okay. Or if you can type those into the chat window.
Go for it.
Go.
If you want to unmute, go for it.
Okay, not hearing any, and I'll maybe prompt again. Hopefully that means I covered things really well. I doubt that's the case, but do want to make sure if you have questions relevant to Wave or maybe anything else kind of relevant to this topic, I'd be happy to take them now. Okay, I am not hearing any. So, okay, wonderful.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Jared. And again, the registration link for part 2 of this webinar series that's going to happen on January 18th, 2023. That link has been dropped in the chat, so it gives you a lot of time to think of your questions and come back and ask Jared at that time. We'll also be putting in a link to the survey. Please go ahead and take a moment to fill that out. And if there are no other questions, thank you for taking your time for today and joining us. We hope to see you in January.
Thank you.